Good afternoon. I'm with 321 Gold founder Bob Moriarty. Bob, how you doing today?
Strange enough, this is really going to be fun because the last week is one of the most interesting weeks I've seen in my lifetime. I don't agree 100%, but there's some really interesting things happening with the new administration.
There are decades where nothing happens, and there are weeks where decades happen. I think the last week or so might be one of those weeks where decades happen. Trump 2.0 hit the ground running. It hasn't even been a week yet, actually. He was sworn in as the 47th president last Monday at around noon, and here we are Sunday. So it's been 6 days. A lot has happened. A lot of executive orders. I don't really know where to start with them, but I'll just choose a topic.
Okay.
Um, the pardons. So Biden left last weekend, Saturday, Sunday. A lot of pardons. I haven't even read the full extent of the pardons, but what stood out was he pardoned basically his entire family. And then Trump came in and he signed some pardons. So what do you make of all these presidential pardons, Bob? And is this what the founding fathers intended? Is this what Benjamin Franklin and George Washington intended?
I don't think so. Now, let me read something to you. And this goes back to 1915. A pardon carries an imputation of guilt, acceptance, a confession of it. That came from the Supreme Court. Now then, both Biden and Trump have set something in motion that is going to take years to settle. You cannot issue a blanket pardon. You can only issue a pardon when a person has been convicted of a crime, not suspected of a crime. But there is a double-edged sword that, to the best of my knowledge, has not been talked about. Now, let's pretend. Let me pick somebody good. Let's pretend Hunter Biden is called to testify in front of Congress. Are you aware that when a person has been pardoned, they lose the Fifth Amendment protection?
Yes.
That's a big deal. That is a giant deal because all these people who accept the pardon, okay, and this is something you have to do. You have to say, yes, I accept pardon. All of the people who accept pardon, first of all, if it goes to the Supreme Court 5 or 10 years from now, Supreme Court could say those are absolute rubbish. You can't pardon your children and your grandchildren and your brother and your mother and your dog. Okay, that's not the purpose of pardons.
Mm.
So the Supreme Court may come in with the Mickey that could open you back up to criminal prosecution. And should you get called in front of Congress and Hunter Biden ask, okay, who's the big guy and why was he getting 10%? Hunter Biden has to tell the truth or he faces charges, okay, on perjury. You
Hmm.
cannot stand behind the Fifth Amendment if you have accepted pardon. So that's one of those things that while I tend to agree with it in theory, I like the idea, uh, but at the same time, it's going to open a can of worms that I don't think very many people realize.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to my childhood and Reagan, George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton, and their pardons. Um, you know, they pardoned people who had been found guilty of a federal crime, and they weren't giving these blanket pardons for a 10-year period for people that hadn't even been charged with a federal crime yet.
I
And
don't think anybody has ever done that. I don't recall that ever being an issue. I don't think that anybody's ever discussed blanket pardons.
yeah, and also pardoning one's own family. I mean, that was never contemplated by any president, as far as I know, until Biden
Well, the really interesting thing there is who is it he didn't pardon that he probably should have
himself.
himself? Okay, because boy,
Well,
if there
that also
dirt,
brings the topic, can you pardon yourself? I mean,
if you
what
pardon your dog, sure you can pardon yourself.
I mean, would George Washington and John Adams have contemplated pardoning themselves?
Well, maybe George Washington, Adams, no, definitely not.
It seems like we've gone really far afield with this presidential pardon power, and it seems to me like it's gone a bit too far now with what, with what Biden just did, and I'm sure what Trump will do during his second term. Um, a couple other topics. I mean, before we get into more uh, topics that are more pertinent to markets, Trump let go of Fauci's bodyguards. He also let go of some other people's bodyguards. Uh, what do you make of that? I mean, I guess Fauci has enough wealth that he can hire his own, but it seems like he would be a guy that has a target on his back. So getting rid of his government sponsored bodyguards is definitely it raises an eyebrow or two.
We're going to have some interesting issues there. My belief is the whole flu nonsense was fraud. Uh, I could send you an image of flu cases from 2019, 2020, 2021. And we went from, I think, 21 million cases of flu in 2019 to 0 in 2020. The way the test worked for the flu was totally fraudulent. The president of Tanzania tested a goat, a pawpaw, and I think a monkey, and they all tested positive for the flu. Okay. The test was flawed, the way it was done. So I think there's probably a lot of people who are angry at Fauci, but I also happen to think he's the biggest criminal in world history, closely followed by Bill Gates. And the scary thing to me is I think Donald Trump is very impressed with money, and he had a long discussion with Bill Gates, and that scares me because Bill Gates is one of those guys. I think he's just a criminal.
Yeah, it's interesting how Gates has now worked his way back into the conversation. But I mean, Trump clearly likes the billionaires and the tech billionaires, and they all went to Mar-a-Lago over the holiday period to kiss the ring and promise some donations and see how they could get their piece of whatever to come over the next 4 to 5 years. Um, a lot of different places where we could go next, but let's just touch upon the Southern California fires because I think this is I mean, obviously it's extremely topical. They're still kind of happening. It just occurred. Um, and the real contrast to me is California is the biggest state in the U.S. It's the biggest economy of any state in the U.S. Southern California is filled with mega million dollar houses. Some of the richest people in the world have property in Los Angeles and San Diego and throughout Southern California. Um, they have high taxes. I mean, there's state taxes in California. I think there's local taxes in certain parts of California. Yet, they couldn't get water to fight fires, and it kind of looked like a third world country for a couple weeks. What's happening in California, Bob?
That's another uh, giant problem. It's Pandora's box. Okay. I think everyone agrees it's the biggest natural disaster in history from a financial point of view. And depending on whether you're talking about insurance coverage or whether you're talking about damages, the damages are somewhere between 25 billion to 250 billion. And I think those are real numbers. The number of people who have been displaced and have been destroyed financially, I think is going to be enormous. And seeing how the state and local reacted to the fire, first of all, and what they do now is pretty terrifying. I think it was the best example I have ever heard of for the flawed logic behind DEI. Okay. We had a bunch of people hired because of what's between their legs or what is between their legs and what the color is. And when it came time to actually do their job, it was obvious that the mayor of LA is incompetent, the fire chief of LA is incompetent, the uh, assistant fire chief of LA is incompetent, the governor of California is competent, but of course they're still in power. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And I was really glad to see Trump come up and say, okay, there are two sexes, there are males and there are females, and we are going to eliminate every DEI program. I fully approve of that. But for the tens of thousands of people who had their homes destroyed, uh, that's terrible, and that's going to create problems for a long, long time. It will take 5 to 10 years to rebuild under the best of circumstances. And given the poor quality of the government, we're not going to have the best of government. I'll give you something that's interesting that I read on Hal Turner. It looks like the fires were set deliberately
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and set deliberately by one of two different governments, not of the United States. And should that be true, uh, that could be really scary. I mean, if
Oh, there you go with the conspiracy theory. Which government did it?
well, exactly. Well, pick somebody you don't like because you blame Russia, you can blame China, you can blame Israel, you can blame the Houthis, you can blame Taiwan. There's so many people who have agendas that conflict with the United States. And it's a little scary because I'll tell you from a technical point of view, I don't think it would be any difficulty whatsoever. I think you can do it with $1,000 drone. And if in fact that's true, that's really scary. And if they catch somebody and identify a foreign government who's behind it, that's very dangerous.
Yeah, that is very scary, actually, Bob. And a couple of things stand out to me about that one is that uh, bad actors who want to perpetrate evil have more than enough capabilities in the modern world to do a lot of damage if they have some level of intelligence and some training. There's a lot that can be done. And then just the incompetence of government. I mean, I my heart goes out to the people who lost their homes and obviously lost their lives. Um, what really puzzles me is where all that tax money went to and how completely incompetent and incapable the local firefighters, the local governments were in trying to save some of those homes and reduce the damage to some extent. It seemed like they just gave up at some point and just let them burn. Um, where did all the tax money go to, and how were the fire hydrants not working? And so there's a lot of hard questions that have to be asked here, but I think it's also another example of you just can't count on government to take care of you, to save you. You know, if people are out there and they're watching this video and part of their plan is, well, the government will take care of me in whatever way that is, whether it's with healthcare or, like a retirement check or whatever. I would strongly advise you to reconsider that. The government can't really take care of itself.
Let me go you one better. Okay. Uh, Trump, and I do approve of this, is trying to close the border, and he's got a real border czar, and he's trying to remove the worst of the people who were admitted to the United States. Now, I don't know what the number is. I've heard a lot of different numbers, but under the Biden administration, there were 9 million or 11 million or 13 million or some absurd number of people who were let into the United States illegally, and tens of billions or hundreds of billions of dollars spent on their welfare. Now the government is going after some of these people and they're deporting them. To bring in 9 or 10 or 12 or 13 million illegal immigrants would be the most wonderful opportunity in the world to sneak in government agents to call upon when you want to attack that country. It would be the easiest thing in the world to bring in 500 trained military guys, bring them into the United States. They're getting fed, they're getting watered, they have accommodations, they get $1,500 a month, and they happen to be in one of the most heavily armed countries in the world. So for these guys to go out when they're told to, okay, go buy some weapons and some bullets and go to a shopping mall and go shoot up a lot of people, I just don't see any environment in which that's not going to happen. I think that's a very real threat. And the mere fact that we're deporting a lot of people today could actually accelerate the timing of that. Bringing in millions of illegal immigrants is a perfect opportunity to bring people in who intend to do harm to you.
Yeah, I think that is very true, and I think anybody would be naive to think that there are not foreign agents and foreign actors in the U.S. who are under pretty deep cover, just waiting to be activated. But let's talk about something a little less morbid, a little less dire. Let's talk about gold. Let's talk about China and the US, Trump and Xi, what it has to do with gold. So this was the topic of my recent presentation in Vancouver at the Metals Investor Forum. And yeah, you can find that on my YouTube channel as well. I have two versions of it, long form and short form. But um, Trump and Xi, I believe, are set to really shape the world economy for a long time to come. And it might take them 6 months to do that. It might take them a year to do that. I'm not entirely sure on the timeline here, but it's going to happen uh, probably, within the next year. And it's pretty complicated how this plays out. A lot of the data that we get from China, Bob, is, to put it nicely, fake. A lot of their economic data is not the real data. You have to dig deeper to try and understand what's actually going on in China. But one thing we do know, Bob, is that China has been accumulating a lot of gold in the last several years, and some of the gold they've been buying has been more of on the covert side of things. They haven't been publicly showing just how much gold they've been buying, but there's no doubt that China has been stockpiling hundreds and hundreds of tons of gold, thousands of tons of gold just since 2022. What do you see playing out between Trump and Xi? And, do you have any clues as to what China's plan is, with regard to gold?
Yeah, of course, that's too easy. If you think there's going to be a financial collapse and you've got lots of reserves, you go buy some gold. And that's what China's been doing. And they're just one of the number of countries' central banks doing exactly the same thing. Uh, I feel sorry for Trump in one way because he is taking over the helm of the Titanic uh, 2 hours after they hit the iceberg. Some of the things that Biden did in the last few weeks before he left office uh, literally rise to the issue of treason. Okay. It's absolutely unconscionable to me how much bad stuff happened. And the strange thing is, I mean, let's admit it, we know it wasn't Biden who did it. It was his administration, but we don't know who it was in his administration. We had no idea who was running the ship. Now, with Trump, at least I'll give him credit, we've got a real good idea of who's up there on the helm, and that's Donald Trump. But to ask about China, there's so many other issues that affect that. Are you aware that the cryptocurrencies are illegal in Russia?
Yes.
Okay. Russia's taken the position we don't believe in cryptocurrencies. Now, my opinion, and it's just my opinion, I'm not saying that's necessarily factual. I think that cryptocurrencies are electronic beanie babies. Some of the things that Trump did, I was astonished to see it. For him to come up with the meme coin, for him and Melania, I think really destroyed the credibility of the cryptocurrencies totally. Okay. It turned it into absolute fraud. Now, somebody came up with a meme and got cute and called it fart coin. And fart coin, because it had a cute name, got a market valuation of 1.5 billion. Now, I don't remember what the Trump meme got up to, but it was 80 or 90 billion dollars. And frankly, that's absurd. And for a president to do that, I think it's just wrong. Okay, it's like him standing at the entrance to the inauguration and charging money to people to come in. Okay, you can come in, but I want more than that. I want $50 from you, $100 for your wife. Hey, you're kind of cute, honey. It
Yeah.
took the presidency down about 10 notches. And what exactly was the purpose? Now, I believe, and the reason I believe cryptocurrencies are electronic beanie babies is they have no real utility. They are 99% speculation and 1% utility. And I think when they crash, and lots of people smarter than me believe they're going to crash, uh, it's going to be devastating because it literally is trillions of dollars that's going to evaporate overnight. And the reason we'll get into resource stocks here soon, the reason the resource stocks have just done nothing for the last year is because you've got the stock market hitting new highs and you've got cryptocurrencies hitting new highs, and all of the hot money is going into them rather than into real resources. And my belief is that's going to change. And I think you could see behind the curtain, a lot of stocks have gone up in the last month, 6 weeks. We talked about this before tax loss selling season. Tax loss selling season is over. Gold's very near an all-time high. Silver's been behaving nicely. So I believe the Chinese think there's going to be a financial collapse of the world's stock market, bond market, US dollars. And I think they're protecting themselves in advance. And frankly, it's what I've done and what I believe other people should do.
So let's follow that line of logic. While I applaud many of Trump's actions in the last week, and I think generally he has a good plan, generally speaking. Let's follow that logic of what Biden and Trump have done in the last week. You know, whether it's Biden pardoning his brother and wife and family and son, or Trump launching a meme coin. Oh, by the way, he claims he doesn't know much about it, but eh, how could it have been launched unless he gave it his approval, right? So, let's agree.
Hang it. What is that question again? I didn't know if you were talking about Biden or Trump.
No, I'm talking about both Biden and Trump. I'm talking about the loss of some of the credibility of the office of the President of the United States. Some of uh, the power and respect of the office when one president is pardoning his son and wife one week, and then the other president is launching a meme coin, a day later. It just somehow this is not George Washington and John Adams and Andrew Jackson. This is now, let me take care of my family and make sure I enrich myself, right? Remember, one of the most famous words that was ever spoken by John F. Kennedy was ask not, what you can do for yourself, like ask what you can do for your country, right? Like what you can do for your country. And I think that to some extent has been lost. I think Trump does have some plans for the good of the country. I think Biden was a lot more questionable in that respect. But let's continue that line of logic, right? That the office of the president has been devalued a bit in recent years. Obviously, the purchasing power of the dollar has been devalued in recent years. The U.S. Treasury Department has to refinance $7 trillion worth of Treasury debt this year. Just this year, they have to refinance $7 trillion. If we look at the inflation data, the Fed is not yet at its 2% target rate yet. Fed Governor Waller came out a week ago saying he wouldn't put a March rate cut off the table yet, which means it's still a possibility. And he also said there's a possibility of 3, even 4 rate cuts in 2025. And then we have Trump on the mic just a few days ago saying the Fed needs to cut interest rates, and I hope that they will. So all of a sudden, Bob, we have the situation where the market a few weeks ago was saying maybe no rate cuts in 2025. But now Waller and now Trump saying, yes, there has to be rate cuts in 2025 because they see this avalanche of Treasury debt that has to be refinanced this year. So if we put it all together, China might be looking at this as an opportunity for them, for the country of China to get a better deal in whatever bargaining, trade tariff talks are getting underway now. A lot of people said that the US has the upper hand in these talks now because China's economy is ailing. But I'm not so sure because the US has a lot of problems too.
Let me give you an analogy. You raised something near and dear to my heart. First of all, tariffs get paid by uh, the people who are purchasing things. So the idea that tariffs hurt China, they hurt consumers first and foremost. Second of all, Trump's biggest problem in his first administration is he surrounded himself with some real losers. And I think the caliber in general is far higher this time. But some of the things that they're talking about, like eliminating the IRS and going to pure tariffs, is like a loose cannon on a sailing vessel. And the reason those cannons were tied down so securely was that if they got into a storm and you had this 5,000-pound cannon running around the deck, okay, it would be knocking holes in the side and masts down and running over people, etc. We have exactly that analogy now. I don't think China's the issue. I think that Mexico and Canada and Greenland and Panama and Europe, Trump believes the best way to negotiate is with the baseball bat. And I totally disagree with that. I think the best way to negotiate is sit down and say, okay, what can we do that's mutually beneficial? He's already threatening Russia with more sanctions and higher tariffs. And that's a joke because we're not doing much business with Russia now. And the country that is really preventing peace in Ukraine is Ukraine. Okay, so he's threatening the wrong guy. It's going to be interesting to see how that works out. But what's it going to do to the economy of Canada, which is already ailing, and the economy of Mexico, which is close behind, to throw a 25 or 30% tariff on? I think doing business now internationally, there are so many wild cards and there's so many bad things that can happen. I have great fear. And you just pointed something out that's very important. We do have this giant issue of the debt in the United States that's $37 trillion now, and 7 trillion of it having to be refinanced. So he's got some scary things, and I don't care how good his people are, and they're better now than they were in the first administration. This is not going to be an easy road home.
Yeah, for sure. The tariff talks and trade talks and Taiwan talks with China are going to be the toughest part. Canada and Mexico. I mean, I think Mexico. I think as long as the border gets taken care of and Mexico cracks down on the narco cartels, I don't think that's gonna really get out of control. I don't see tariffs going on Mexico because, like you said, it's going to cost the consumer, and obviously Trump is sensitive to the consumer and consumer prices. Canada's a little more interesting, but maybe they're going to have an election in a couple months, and there'll be a little more sanity there, at the federal level in Canada. Let's talk about gold, Bob. I've got some ideas about the gold miners, but let's talk about gold first. So gold has had a nice start to 2025. In fact, on Friday, gold made an all-time weekly closing high, 27.79 on the February futures contract. What do you make of gold here? What do you make of sentiment in gold? And is there anything to worry about from a seasonality standpoint? Sometimes February is not the best month for gold.
Uh, that was a lot of questions.
Okay, well, let's talk about sentiment first.
Uh, I don't think, and while I'm a big believer in sentiment, I don't believe sentiment's as important today as it has been in other commodities, because I believe the primary driver is central banks, and frankly, they don't give a shit about the sentiment. I was unaware that gold hit an all-time high, weekly closing high. It had hit an all-time high in the Canadian dollar and the euro and the British pound recently. And frankly, I think gold is a little expensive, okay, bearing in mind it's 10 times higher than it was 25 years ago. Gold's gone up a lot. Gold's not cheap. Platinum's cheap, silver's cheap, but gold's not necessarily cheap. However, if you believe that there's going to be some kind of currency reset or currency problem or financial chaos, you don't care what you pay for gold. The debt in the United States is a giant issue, and as much as Donald Trump would like to get it under control, I'm not sure how much he can affect the budget. Okay. So, are we going to keep having $1 trillion or $2 trillion or $3 trillion addition to the national debt every year? That is, frankly, it's not sustainable. So I wish him luck there, but the Treasury Secretary and the Fed are going to have some problems.
Okay. And yeah, so you know what? I agree with you regarding sentiment. And certainly I think sentiment is most useful at extremes. And I don't think that we're at an extreme here or anywhere near an extreme in gold and silver. So it's not really that worthwhile to focus on, at least not yet. What about seasonality? So it's Chinese New Year in a couple days, Bob. And then, February, it's kind of interesting because gold usually has a nice run at the end of every year and then early in the new year, January. And then sometimes February is a little mixed. Uh, what about seasonality? So we agree that sentiment's not that important. Is seasonality important?
I think this year, probably not.
Okay.
For exactly the reasons we were just talking about. I think there are other factors that are more important. If I saw silver hitting new highs and platinum hitting new highs, I would say yes, okay, seasonality is going to kick in. But we have an exceptionally fragile financial situation in the world today that would not take very much for it to fall off a cliff. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when Putin and Trump talk, because it would be nice to put that war behind us. It's been a stupid war that solved no problems whatsoever. 1 million Ukrainians died. It was for no purpose. I have been dead set against that war right from the get-go, and nobody wins any war. And I know Trump's been given bad information there because he thinks more Russians have been killed than Ukrainians. And I know, as a guy who was in the military, I know it's not true. If you want to figure out what the kill ratio is between one group and another group, all you have to do is look at the number of artillery rounds that are fired, because 80% or so of people killed in combat are killed by artillery. And if the Russians are firing 10 times as many artillery rounds as the Ukrainians, it means 10 times as many Ukrainians are dying. I resent the deaths of any Ukrainians. I resent the deaths of any Russians. I have always been against that war. We had the chance to end it almost 3 years ago, and we didn't take it, and that was foolish.
Yeah, I think that people are very tired of the war, both in Ukraine and in Russia, although less so in Russia because the war hasn't affected people as much there as it has in Ukraine. But I think it definitely is time for it to come to an end. And I agree with you. A lot of wasted lives, no objectives were really accomplished on either side. I mean, maybe Russia got some more land and they could say it's theirs now, but really not many objectives achieved there. I'm not sure about the kill rates, and maybe, the artillery ratio was relevant in World War One or World War Two. I'm not so sure it's relevant today, because if you look at the way Russia fights, Bob, they use a World War One strategy of storming trenches, going into, artillery and drones with men. Their, regard for human life is not as high as it is, you know, from the Ukrainian side. And also they like to just cover these fields with artillery shells. So their artillery guys are literally just pancaking wide open fields where there's no men, just so they can make sure it's scorched earth. So I'm not sure that that ratio is as relevant, but no doubt probably 1 million people have died on both sides, for little reason. Um,
Let me let
I
me let
hope.
me let me point one thing out, and we haven't mentioned it. We really should mention it. Trump just turned off the supply spigot to Ukraine,
Mhm,
and that means Ukraine just lost the war. So the issue is not going to be if Ukraine loses land, it's going to be an issue of how much land they lose.
mhm.
And I feel bad about that because it's one of those situations that could continue to fester for years in the future. Uh, it's a stalemate similar to what happened in Korea in 1953. It's not a victory for anybody.
Yeah, I think Trump is following a strategy here. I think it's part of his the art of the deal tactic. So, first of all, you cut off the supplies that one side needs, and now the clock is ticking. Like they know that if they wait more than 30 days, they're going to be extremely compromised. Um, and then on the other side, you threaten tariffs, but Russia's not sending us anything anyway. So what are you going to tariff? But I think Trump generally just wants to make a deal and get this over with. I think that he probably has spoken to Putin, despite the fact that they say he hasn't yet. I think they know what's about to play out, and I think that, Z and Ukraine are going to have to follow along, because they're not in a place of strength here. Europe cannot, replace what the U.S. has sent over there. There's just no way. Like, even if they did a full mobilization, they just don't have the infrastructure and the manufacturing capabilities that we do in the U.S. So, moving on to mining stocks, gold miners, juniors. I really feel this is a unique moment in time, and I put a blog post up on my Goldfinger Capital Substack that you link to. And really, just to summarize it in 2 sentences, I think the profitability outlook for the gold mining sector has never been better, or at least rarely been better than it is today. And the sector is positioned for growth. Okay. It's positioned for fatter profit margins, bigger, revenues, and better earnings growth, quite frankly. Yet people really don't like the gold mining sector. And I pull up a chart of Kinross Gold, which is KGC on the NYSE, and I'll actually put that in this video. And it's at a multi-year high, basically closed at a 52-week high on Friday, and I don't think anybody cares, which is really amazing, because from my experience, when stock prices are going up and strong uptrends and nobody cares, that's the perfect time to own them.
Well, you use one word that we should probably define. You were talking about profit. The real percentage moves are in companies that are not in production, have no profit whatsoever. And for the last year, it's been exceptionally difficult for companies to raise money. And the junior resource stocks in Toronto and Vancouver are the cheapest they've ever been relative to gold. And I believe that's going to change. I think it already has started to change. I think a lot of stocks are up since the middle of December. But the sentiment is worse. It is the worst I've ever seen it. And I've been tracking, I suppose, back to probably 1975, 1970, 1975. I was looking at gold stocks back then. So I think the opportunity in resource stocks across the board is exceptional. And in the junior lottery tickets, I think it's world class. I think you're going to see a lot of stocks up 5 or 10-fold. Some of the stocks in the Tombstone belt that you're very familiar with have already seen extraordinary gains, and they're starting.
So the Yukon, the Tombstone gold belt of the Yukon. So that's where Snowline is. That's where Banyan is. That's where Sitka is. You just mentioned Rackla, and there's a number of other ones, quite frankly, but those are the ones that stand out. I know we've talked about Sitka before. We've talked about Banyan before. I saw Tara in Vancouver just about a week ago. Which ones are your favorite right now, Bob?
All of the above. My
Eh,
single choice would be Rackla, which is selling at 12% of what Sitka is, but Sitka is still, I think, like 15% of what Snowline is. Snowline is the most fully valued. Banyan is absurdly cheap. Sitka has a 30,000 meter drill program scheduled and financed, and Rackla, it has an $11 million market cap. So literally, I think every single one of those is going to gain. Some of them will gain more than others. And I'll give you a lot of credit. I mean, you've done a better job than anybody I know of covering these stocks.
Thank you, Bob. Yeah, it's been a little bit of a mix last year in the Yukon with the pad failure at Vickel, but with Sitka, and they actually were on my panel at the conference in Vancouver last week. With Sitka, they drilled some of the best gold intercepts of 2024, quite frankly. In fact, at the Blackjack deposit, hole 68 was 678 meters, grading 1.04 grams per ton gold, with some higher grade intervals in there that were as high as 17 grams. There was a 93-meter interval of 2.5 grams. A lot of VG throughout that hole. So when I see like an intercept of 600 plus meters averaging more than a gram, it makes me think that this is going to be a mine.
Oh, absolutely. But certainly Banyan, okay, certainly Snowline. But at $2,790 gold divided by 31.1, uh, gold is $90 a gram US, okay, which would
Hmm.
make it, I think, about 125 or 130 Canadian. So that is an extraordinary intercept, and it suggests it's not a one-off. Okay, so I think that their 30,000 meter program is going to be incredibly successful. And I think they're starting. You would know this better than me. They're starting next month, aren't they?
I'm not sure if they're going to start. Like, I know they can start drilling in February. I'm not sure if it's going to be February or March, so I don't want to say something wrong, but they can definitely start the season early. So I would expect that they will be back up there with the drill rigs, by the end of March.
Yeah.
Um, let's move on. A couple of other ones. Lion One has actually had a very nice rebound. They put out a great gold intercept last week. I'm kind of interested in your thoughts on that one.
Uh, Lion One is sitting in a garden filled with elephants, and nobody recognizes the fact that an alkaline gold deposit in the hand, 100% in the hands of a junior, is a big deal. Because of the cost of money, they've had to do several placements that were not particularly favorable to them. But I don't see that as a problem of the project. I think it's a problem of the time more than anything else. They have good people working for them. They've got really extraordinary intercepts. They're alkaline deposits. They've got an identical gold mine 40 kilometers away that has produced, I think, 11 million ounces. So it's taken longer than I wished, but I think Lion One is going to be a giant success.
And by the way, to really emphasize the tax loss silly season and what an opportunity it is at the end of every year in the sector, something that you and I have pounded the table on and we spoke about a couple times at the end of 2024. But with Lion One, on one of the final trading days of 2024, it traded as low as 22.5 cents. So they were just giving this stock away in the final days of 2024. So it hasn't even been a month since then, and the stock is up more than 50% since that end of 2024 low. And there's many other examples of stocks that are up 40, 50, 60% just in January, and because the market was just giving them away at the end of 2024. So really can't emphasize that enough to investors and speculators in the junior, resource space. Really, you got to pay attention during tax law silly season because some of the best opportunities are made available then.
Well, we talked about that again and again and again and made it as simple as you could possibly make it. And Lion One is just a perfect example. 50% gain a month. That's the Spanish term for that. It's called El Goodo Dilo.
Final topic, the 51 spooks who had their security clearance pulled. What happened with that one? I don't know much about the story except for it has something to do with Hunter Biden's laptop.
Well, the FBI had control of the laptop 10 months before the election. And just prior to the election, Blinken, who was Biden's Secretary of State, as a reward, Blinken goes to James Clapper and says, hey, get some of your buddies to sign this piece of paper saying it has the hallmarks of a Russian information campaign. And we need to discredit the laptop because we want Biden to win the election. Now, people can have their own opinion about who actually won the election. I've got my opinion, and I think that the exercise at January 6th was not a riot, was not an insurrection. It was a very real protest against criminal activity on the part of the Democrats. But there were 51 intelligence professionals, and Trump said, when I'm elected president, when I'm sworn in, I'm going to yank their security clearances so they've no longer got a free ride on government information. And he did exactly that. And if they ever deserved that, last week was the time. And they got what they deserved, and they got it good and hard.
And then final topic, the JFK, Martin Luther King, Robert Kennedy files. Now, he did this video clip signing the order to make those, or to, I guess get rid of the top secret confidential uh marking for those files. So now it's up to the respective agencies to declassify those, make those public. I haven't seen it on archives.gov yet. I haven't seen any of the JFK files, and I'm sure I would hear about it very quickly if they were made public. Is this going to be a nothing burger because the CIA has already scrubbed all these documents already, or is there actually going to be something of value in these files?
The only reason they have refused to declassify them is because they're hiding something.
Yeah. Yeah, they're definitely hiding something. I'm not sure there's going to be a smoking gun. There could be. I'm not sure there will be, but probably there'll be some clues in there that some of the people who have studied these assassinations, intensively over the last 50 years will be able to put some of the pieces of the puzzle together. Like even just with Oswald, was he a CIA asset, right? Like obviously he was, but they have not admitted it. The CIA has consistently denied that. But if there's a file there that says, "Yep, he met with his handler in Washington D.C. on this date in 1961," and blah blah blah, and he was given money to pay for his trip or something like that. Well, that would be, oh, okay, there you go. He was a CIA asset. He went to the Soviet Union because the CIA gave him an order or two. That was his, mission, blah, blah, blah. And then everything that happened in Dallas in 1963, well, that was also like another mission. And you can figure out what that mission was and whether he actually pulled the trigger or who pulled the trigger that day in November 1963. So it'd be very interesting.
Well, interestingly enough, is President Trump's selection of John Ratcliffe to head the CIA. Okay, he's going to get to the heart of the matter, and the DOJ, the CIA, the FBI have been totally out of control for the last few years. And they're like the mayor of LA and the governor of California. We need a reset. We need to go back to security agencies that work for the country, not for a political party.
Well, you said they've been out of control for the last few years. Um, if it comes out the CIA had involvement in the assassination of John F. Kennedy or Martin Luther King or Robert F. Kennedy Jr., I would say they've been out of control for much longer than a few years.
Yeah, but here's the problem with that. How much does something that happened 62 years ago, how much does that have to do with what's going on today? The better example is the 51 people who signed that document, and even the assassination attempt on Biden, on Trump in Pennsylvania. There are so many unanswered questions in that particular issue. It's a little scary, and this is where Trump is dealing with some very dangerous people, and I hope he has a good security force.
Yeah, I think you make a good point, and yeah, we could go further into the JFK rabbit hole, but I think it is relevant because the reasons why Kennedy was killed, it was multifaceted for sure, but some of those reasons are still relevant today. Without saying more, I think it's still relevant today. And you make a good point about what happened last summer in Pennsylvania, where some completely unheard of kid gets a clean shot with a rifle at the soon to be president of the United States. And the police, the law enforcement, the Secret Service are just having donuts and watching. I mean, it's there's a lot of questions there.
Right. Well, that was easily the most bizarre shot I have ever witnessed in my life. Donald Trump was a quarter of an inch or half an inch away from having his brains blown out. And for him to have actually survived that is nothing short of remarkable. And for the kid to be such a rotten shot that he couldn't do it at 140 meters. When I was in the Marine Corps, we had to shoot on iron sights standing at 200 meters, 140 meters. You could throw a rock and hit him.
You know, it's interesting you say that because I think his first shot was the best shot. I think it was the one that that just missed when Trump turned his head. But then after the shots were ringing out, his aim got really bad. He was shooting people in the stands. But you think back to the JFK shooting and how the Warren Commission claims that Oswald, who by all accounts was a pretty poor marksman, like based upon all of the shooting he did in the military, made 3 shots within 6 seconds from 100 yards away, 6 stories up, moving vehicle with the worst rifle ever made. This Italian, World War I rifle that nobody ever wanted to use. That was very hard to turn the bolt on. It was a bolt action, so it wasn't semi-automatic, it's bolt action. So he's taking the shot, turning the bolt, exchanging the round, then aiming again. He's doing this all 3 shots in 6 seconds. He hits Kennedy in the back, then a kill shot on Kennedy, and then the governor in the front seat. So all 3 hit, 3 for 3.
But he was a Marine.
He was a Marine. So, and they had the sniper team for the FBI try the same setup, and they couldn't do as well as Oswald. So the best snipers in the FBI, none of them could do as well with that rifle as Oswald supposedly did. And Oswald was a mediocre to piss poor shot based upon the shooting he did, in the armed forces. So, and by the way, the army does not use that rifle, that Italian rifle that he had. For whatever reason, he had that Italian rifle that was the worst rifle that was ever, made for war. It's very interesting. Um, it's very interesting. And the fact that everybody bought that story for 60 years is remarkable. But I guess we'll leave it there, Bob. I think we covered a lot of ground now. So
Good deal.
thank you. Cheers.
Anytime.